Hello and welcome to another episode of The Blue Wave. I'm your host, Max Lopez. We got a really good show for you today. Topics are going to include Republicans passing their debt ceiling bill on a very narrow margin, setting up a debt showdown with Joe Biden, Ted Cruz bombshell leaked audio prior to the January 6th insurrection, as well as Zooey Zephyr, Montana lawmaker who is refusing to be silenced in a really awesome way. And on a little bit of a lighter note, we got Joe Biden's secret Oval Office TV, as well as some of his other quirky habits that he has. So starting off here, we're going to go into the Republicans passing their debt ceiling bill by a very slim margin. Okay, so we got an article here. House GOP passes debt limit bill, paving the way for a clash with Biden. House Republicans narrowly passed a bill to raise the debt ceiling while cutting spending by nearly 14% over a decade. Biden has vowed to veto the measure. Says the House on Wednesday narrowly passed Republicans' bill to raise the debt ceiling while cutting spending and unraveling major elements of President Biden's domestic agenda in a GOP bid to force Mr. Biden to negotiate over spending reductions or risk a catastrophic debt default. Facing his most significant challenge since being elected to his post, Speaker Kevin McCarthy barely cobbled together the votes to pass the bill, which was approved 217 to 215 along party lines. The legislation would raise the debt ceiling into next year in exchange for freezing spending at last year's levels for a decade, a nearly 14% cut, as well as rolling back parts of Mr. Biden's landmark health, climate, and tax law, imposing work requirements on social programs, and expanding mining and fossil fuel production. Okay, so all these things that were just mentioned, as well rolling back Biden's landmark health, climate, and tax law, imposing work requirements on social programs, and expanding mining and fossil fuel production. These are some of the elements of the bill which contribute to Chuck Schumer and Biden and others, alluding to the fact that the bill is dead on arrival in the Democratic-controlled Senate. Dead on arrival, meaning it's most certainly not going to pass. So you really have to look at what is the calculus here for the Republicans to pass this bill through that they know is going to be dead on arrival in the Senate. And from their perspective, it's to be able to pitch to the American people, hey, look, we've passed something. We don't want the catastrophic consequences of a debt default to happen. So we've passed something, and it's the Democrats, it's Biden that want it to default. See, they're vetoing it. Look, they don't want to raise the debt ceiling. It's their problem, right? But what you're going to have Democrats arguing is that we are not going to negotiate with a gun to our head and have us be told negotiate and pass our spending cuts, or we pull the trigger on the American economy. That's not a negotiation. The Democratic Party is simply not going to be held hostage and have major elements of Biden's administration successes, right? Major progresses that we've made. Clean energy tax credits, the child tax credit program. The Democrats are simply not going to allow for such a bill to pass. And this sets up a situation where we have a game of chicken, a really dangerous game of chicken being played. And who is going to blink first, right? The MAGA GOP have shown themselves to be very stubborn, and they've shown themselves to be very anti-American. And my fear is that we are at risk. The risk of a debt default happening in the United States is higher than it's ever been. just due to the amount of concessions that Kevin McCarthy gave to this far-right MAGA wing of the GOP House in order to become Speaker in the first place, right? So let's say that they're not able to pass it through the Senate and it gets vetoed back. There's nothing stopping the Republicans from coming up with a even more drastic bill to cut even more spending and to send that to the Senate and to have that get vetoed. It's a very dangerous game that we're heading towards, of politics being played with people's paychecks and with people's government assistance. And I really don't put it past the MAGA GOP wing to send us into such a crisis. And it's going to be interesting to see what continues to happen over the summer and whether or not the Democrats are going to have to end up budging on certain aspects of the bill and passing it to avoid a catastrophic debt default. Now, I really don't think that Biden is going to cave at all, because they don't have any reason to, because the Republicans are going to run home and blame everything on the Democrats anyways, right? They're already blaming Biden for the inflation. They're already blaming for everything under the sun that's going wrong in America. They're blaming Biden for it already. So I really hope that the Democrats are able to hold strong and that they are able to not blink even for a second and give in at all to the far right MAGA demands, okay? And we're going to see what happens over the summer. Well, like I said earlier, I really believe that we are at risk of a debt default happening, and it's something that people need to begin to prepare for. And there's not really any way I see out of this where the Democrats are going to suddenly be willing to roll back, 14% spending over the next 10 years. It's just not going to happen. You don't have anyone in the Democratic Party outside of maybe Joe Manchin who's even going to consider that for even a second. And given the makeup of the Senate, the Republicans don't have the votes to get it through. And even if it did pass the Senate, Biden's already said he's most certainly gonna veto it. So I'm not sure where that leaves us. It's quite scary, and I'm holding out for news that this is going to get better, just like everyone else.